you made the birth of your child and did a Celine Dion gig in one day.
And I had
incredible.
bought some cigars from Holland prior to returning from Europe.
Hey, James here from eBass Guitar, and welcome to another interview from our 60k celebration series. This is one of these interviews I'll just never forget. I was on tour in Canada with the Celine Dion experience, and I knew I had to try and meet the man who actually played the bass lines night after night. The bassist who toured the world with Celine Dion for well over 20 years. And against all the odds, we made it happen. I met Marc Langis in person at the Conservatoire de Musique de Gatineau. I hope I pronounced that correct. Just 20 minutes before we sat down, then we recorded the interview. What followed was an honest, inspiring and beautifully human conversation. Marc is a deeply humble and thoughtful man, a true musician through and through. He spoke about everything from life on the road, to the costs of touring, to attending Jaco Pastorius' funeral, to recording with the legendary producer David Foster. He's someone who's quietly played a role in some of the biggest musical moments of our time, yet carries himself with a huge amount of humility. What's remarkable though is Marc is a French Canadian and English is his second language. I didn't even notice until after the interview when he quietly asked, "How was my English?" That's the kind of guy he is, really thoughtful, really dedicated. I'm truly honoured to share this conversation with you.
So Marc, you've had this incredible career playing with Celine Dion, touring the world, and now you're a professor at a music conservatoire. I'm really curious, who is the man behind the music? Who is the person when the bass is all packed away?
Well, you know, I think I'm still just a kid, actually. And I just, came to music through the love of it. And I still do enjoy music, all kind of music. Obviously I made a career as let's say a pop artist, backing up, one of the greatest singer of all time. But I'm also a big jazz lover. Classical music always was a big part of my life. Baroque music was what I grew up with. I was in a choir as a child, right? So I was in a kids choir for something like 7 years, from age 8 to probably 15, yeah. And so we ended up singing at every Sunday's mass, and so we covered all the religious repertoire, the Bach and Palestrina and all that. But also during the summer we had this. Anyway, we used to sing more like songs from the Beatles and different kind of pop music, but arranged for choir, and we'd give these performances every week. So it was a big training for me. Singing is such a big part of my learning my learning music. So I think today what I'm trying to do with this school here, because I'm the director of the school, but I do teach improvisation as well, because I've been trained as a jazz musician. Basically, I have a master's degree in jazz. But it's basically, I think, once you can sing the part, once you can express music with your voice, then you have internalized music. So then what happened is a very different thing than being, let's say, sitting at the piano and just reading the chart. You will express things differently, and you will express things that you wouldn't express without it. So for me, but it comes from there. It comes from my own experience as a kid, singing in a choir. So
that's absolutely fascinating. It takes me back to my time. I spent 5 years as a chorister in the UK.
Well, there you go.
And I definitely feel it's a formative music training. It connects music through your hands, through your ears, and into your head. That kind of completes that cycle, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's like learning to speak the language. That's, when you think of it, I always use this image because I think it's a very important thing. When we come to this world, when we're born, I mean, we don't talk a language. We learn the language through hearing people, our parents and then our siblings, and then eventually we will, catch up on syllables and then some words, and then eventually we'll put these words together. But it's a long process. But music, if we learn music this way, I think it's the best way. It's because
so you started off as singing.
Yeah.
How did the bass then come along?
Oh, well, it's the Beatles.
The Beatles.
Yeah, when I was something like 12 or 13 years old, I just decided that I would, pick up. Actually, it's a funny story because I was, at the time, I was playing hockey on a regular basis, in organized leagues and stuff. And I was quite good at it, actually. I started as a goaler, and then they took me to the center because they felt like, you can skate and you can,
really?
and so I had a pretty decent start. And then, anyway, at one game I got hurt, and then some guy just broke my leg. And so that's when I started picking up on my brother's guitar. And then eventually, but I was playing the bass parts. The first record I've listened to and enjoyed playing along was this record by Neil Young, Harvest. And I think, isn't it Leland Sklar playing on this record? Could be.
It could be.
Could be, because it was exactly his kind of...
Yeah, we'll check that out afterwards.
Yeah. Anyway, and so, that's how it started. So I picked up the bass, and then at some point, there was a friend of mine. Anyway, my dad had a friend that his son owned an Offner bass. And so I found out about it, and he was actually selling the bass. So I actually ended up having an Offner bass, a late 60s Offner. I still own it. I still have it at home, yeah. So I could actually learn all the Beatles songs performing on the original, Offner bass that Paul used to play. So that was a big blast. That was between the age of 13 and 15. That's basically all I did.
Amazing.
Learn all the songs, learn all the bass tracks, and the singing parts, and the Beatles. Yeah.
How fascinating. So, the Celine Dion gig is obviously the big one, and we will talk about in a second. But I'm already aware there are some fantastic stories in the interim of studying in Quebec, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then going down to the University of Miami.
Exactly.
What are your recollections of that period?
Oh my God. When I entered McGill, because I had studied oboe and some upright bass at the college level. We have college level here prior to university. So I had studied these two instruments, but my real passion was for electric bass. But at the time, you couldn't study electric bass in any school, basically, serious school, right? Yeah. It wasn't considered a serious instrument to begin with. So when McGill opened up a jazz program back in 1983, then I saw an opportunity for me to go there and study jazz on my instrument, and then maybe become, a teacher, jazz teacher or whatever. I had no real plan of making a career. I had dreamed of it, but dream of something and to realize it is a very different thing, But McGill came along, and so I did an undergrad program there. And then at some point, someone talked to me about University of Miami, because they did offer a master's degree in jazz at the time, and there was no such thing in Canada.
Right.
So that's when I got a scholarship from the Canadian Art Council, and also, anyway, from the University of Miami, I got a scholarship from them. So I moved to Miami at the end of August 1987, and because that's the school I wanted to be in, because Jaco Pastorius was from Miami. He was originally from Philadelphia, but he grew up in Miami, and he studied in that school, and he became a bass teacher in that school for a while, and that's where he met Pat Metheny, and it's a big part of jazz history anyway. And so I ended up there, and Jaco died a month later. So I was at Jaco's funeral. It was amazing, you know. I remember all these musicians. Well, Joe Zawinul was there, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Pat Metheny, all these guys that had played with Jaco, right, and loved him. So that was during the day, and then at night there was this big event with the family and Pat Metheny and Peter Erskine on drums that performed Jaco's favorite standard, which was All the Things You Are. They did an amazing rendition of that. And so after that, what happened is that, because Jaco had grown up there, so he had all these, you know, teenage buddies, you know, that I ended up meeting. Guys like Otello Molino and Randy Bernson and Bobby Thomas Jr. And I actually ended up playing with these guys in the same little jazz clubs that Jaco had performed in, you know, as a teenager growing up in Miami and learning the craft, you know. So it was just an amazing time for me. It's just like wow. I felt I was so blessed, you know, to be there. Because it was just such a big part of my upbringing as a bassist, you know. I remember the first time I heard Jaco, I was 16 or 17 years old, and someone just brought that tape. At the time we had tape cassettes, you know, and I put the tape cassettes there and I started playing it then. And I hear this amazing bass playing, and I'm like, wow, okay, this is where it's at now. This is where I have to bring it. You know, I have to bring my level of playing to this level. And so that was really like the beginning of many, many years of study. You know, I did the college, then McGill University in Montreal, then University of Miami. So I studied for many, many years, and and then performing with these guys at the same time was just an amazing time anyway. And I've
brilliant. So, what year did you get the Celine Dion gig?
That was 1995.
So what happened in between your time in? Briefly take us through those years between
sure.
Miami and then that gig coming on. What happened?
Well, at the end of my graduate studies in Miami, I got a call from someone in Quebec that that I knew, and they said, "Well, we have this record label now, and if you're interested, we'll hire you as the in-house bass player. So you'll be recording with different artists that So I came back from Miami and I did that, and then I met a drummer that we kind of started teaming together, and we did all these incredible recordings, So for 5 years I did that. So from 1989 till 1995, basically, I was mainly a studio player, bass player. I did some TV, regular TV, TV shows, live TV actually, like these house band on a really cool show. And we backed up artists like, Barry White and Robert Palmer and Sheryl Crow and all these big names came on the show.
So you were the Canadian Will Lee.
I was the bass player for the. Amazing. So I did that for 3 years, and Celine came on the show. So probably that someone there noticed me and the drummer, Dominique the drummer, because we were teaming by then. And eventually we got a call, and we got hired. But the whole audition process was just the craziest thing,
Go on, tell us about the audition.
Yeah. Okay.
For Celine Dion.
So after 3 years on that TV show, the summer came, and then I had worked with the Cirque du Soleil for many years. I had done, I don't know, a certain numbers of albums with them, and so they called me up and they said, "Well, we have this big show, celebrating 10 years of Cirque du Soleil music or whatever." So I got involved, and as I was doing the show, I got a call from the Celine Dion's team, and they said, "Marc, we'd like to know if you would be interested in coming and doing one show with Celine. It's for one show, and it's going to be in the western part of Canada, in Alberta."
Was she already well known by this point?
Things were starting to pick up, yeah, in 1995. She had a few hits before, but it was nothing like, you know, what was about to happen for her. Right. And so basically, they said, okay, there's three things you need to know. The first thing is that you have to memorize the entire show. It's a 2-hour-long show. Wow. You need to memorize the music because it's going to be filmed for Much Music. You know, at the time we had Much Music, you know, which was a video channel, right? Music video channel. So basically that was that. And so I had to memorize all the music. I wouldn't meet Celine before actually 1 hour prior to getting on stage with her for the first time. So no chance to see her evolve on the stage, to get to know, okay, is it all right? Is it not all right with her? You know, no clue. And the third thing was, my God, what was the third thing? Anyway, but you see the context that, yeah. And they said, yeah, but it's one show. Okay, so, oh no, the third thing, it was for a weekend of Canadian music for celebrating the Hudson Bay Company. Yeah, yeah. 325 or 50 year, you know, whatever, some anniversary anyway. Yep. So everybody in the Canadian business was there. David Foster was, Anne-Marie, Blue Rodeo, you know, some bands and art. And Brian Adams was there, obviously. And Celine was there closing the Saturday night. It was 3 days of just music. And that's why I decided we had 1 week rehearsal in Montreal without Celine, just the band, learning the songs, memorizing the tracks and all. And right. And then we flew to Alberta and did the show. And what I didn't know was actually everybody from Sony was there. Sony World, I mean. So Sony France, Sony England, Sony Australia, you know, Japan. They were all there because René, who was Celine's husband, but also the manager, right? Sony had just invested, at the time, I think it was something like $100 million in Celine's career for over the next 5 years. But they wanted to have the best band on stage with her. And the reality was that René wasn't keen to have guys from LA backing up Celine.
No. Because I was going to ask you, did she not have a band at this point?
She had a band, but the band was, you know, local guys. Right. And so the whole issue was, okay, Sony was saying, okay, we're putting all this money. We want professional musicians behind her. But René was like, yeah, but, you know, Celine has a French-Canadian background. Yep. I want the guys on stage to understand what she's, you know, when she's talking about someone from Quebec or a story related to some, you know, some jokes or whatever it is. In French, I want the guys to pick it up. I don't want Celine to become just an American singer. That was René's vision. Yeah. So he insisted. So they said, okay, we're going to give you one chance. You put a band together. Yeah. And there's this concert in Alberta. Yeah. And we'll bring everybody from the world, from Sony, you know, and people will have block notes and pens, and they will take note. And after the show, we'll tell you if it works or not. So, yeah, so this show was all about that. We didn't know. I didn't know. It was better that way. Yeah. It would have been just nerve-wracking, completely nerve-wracking. But I was just there to do a show. I was used to cameras, and I was good at memorizing music, so I did it all, you know, without a single chart in front of me, just grooving along and watching Celine. And Celine's such a pro, you know. I could feel natural with her right away, you know. She was just really, she had so much experience by then. She was 26 years old, but, you know, she had started at age 12, so she had tons of experience.
So I'm going to ask a question. So we're here with the Celine Dion Experience, wonderful tribute show to her, and it's a total honor to be in this room with you at this moment. So I was in the hotel last night and I asked the band, what questions should I ask Marc? And this is from Ray, the guitarist, and he wanted to know, what's your process for learning and memorizing a show like Celine's? Like, how do you do it?
Okay, I use charts.
Right.
I use the the manuscript. Like we always do. We call them lead charts.
Yep.
Like you have the whole arrangement on a few pages, maybe 3 pages.
Yep.
So you have, okay, you repeat this and then you go to the next section and then you've got all the chords written down. You've got the bass lines. If it's a very definite bass line or a hook, it's going to be written down. So what I do, I use a photographic memory. That's what I've developed. So I will look at the score, listen to the music, look at the score, and learn, okay, this repeats, and then I go there, and then I go back to the sign, then coda, and blah, blah, blah. And then that's how I work. And I just did that. I had the music 1 month prior to this, specific concert. Yep. So the month before, that's all I did, listening to Celine's music, because I wasn't really familiar with Celine's music before. Yep. I had it, I was familiar with the hits on the radio, but like I said, I was trained as a jazz musician, so I've listened more to jazz music than pop music. Yep. But that's what I did, and then you have 1 week to practice with other guys, so you get comfortable at some point, and and then first thing you know, you're familiar with it.
So as I understand it, so the lead sheets, so it's a mixture of chords, notation as you need it for something specific like that. Is it 3 pages long, or is it maybe 1?
Sometimes it could be longer, sometimes it could be
my process is to try and it doesn't necessarily always work, but I did it to learn this show was to try and get it into 1 piece of paper with the repeats there.
There you go.
That's
a good way. That's a good way, yeah.
Yeah.
To write it down is such a great, that's one thing I did a lot earlier on in my life, was to transcribe music. Yep. Transcribe Jaco's bass lines or solos or all the Beatles or, whatever music that, had an impact on me. I felt like, okay, well, I'm going to write this bass part down. What's going on there? Really, and then writing it imprints your memory. It becomes part of you.
So did you write them down yourself, or were you given charts?
In some cases I was given charts, but I always, like I said, I'm always good at, okay, I'll take the time to really do the dictation, and then I know it's my writing, and it's part of me now. It's in my memory.
So you start off by writing it down, and then this takes me back to interviewing Leland Sklar a couple of weeks ago, because he was talking about when he had to step in for Toto at the last minute, like 4 days before. And he said this thing that really struck with me. He said, bass charts are like heroin. They're impossible to get off. Which is just, I'm dyslexic, and I totally get that. So what does that process look like of going from the chart to actually trusting yourself and performing it after?
Yeah, it's something you have to do, it's something you have to do. And, I've also worked a lot of times with charts on stage, but I always position the music stand in such a way that people don't see that there's a music stand there. It's very discreet. I put it aside like this, and the charts are there, so most people won't even see a music stand. They think I'm just, but it's there. But it's the matter of really getting, things in, imprint in your memory, and it's.
Is there? I'm fascinated by this. You mentioned a photographic memory. Are you using the visual of the page in?
Yeah, sometimes it's just like I remember how it looks on paper.
Interesting.
So but when I do this, I make sure I'm very concentrated on what I'm doing. I'm not just doing this while something else is going on. I'm very, very focusing. But also being a studio musician was very helpful, because in studio, the sooner you get away from the chart, the better you play. Yeah. And since time is money in studio, they want to have a result. Within an hour, you have to be able to go from, okay, I don't know this song, to, okay, I have a final track. I have a, this is it. We have a track. Thanks, Mark. We'll see you next time. And it's all done, wrapped up. So I've developed this as well, like to really catching up on things by just listening. So the whole listening issue is also very important. But when you have a whole show to memorize, like I had to, and Celine it was always like that, and from one show to another, we changed the pacing, even during these world tours, because we're, one night you're in France, the next day you're in England. You're not going to play the same songs, exactly the same songs, in both cities.
Yeah.
So it's okay, you have to go back to, okay, what was that song again? And I listen to it, okay, get the chart, and then, okay, yeah, all right, I guess I can do it,
So you learned this music, fascinating finding out about the process. Then, clearly, as I understand it, that resulted in you getting the gig. And the next 20 years with Celine?
Yeah, it's funny. So David Foster, at the end of the show, David Foster came to us backstage in that little, and he said, guys, nice gig, He just introduced himself. I didn't know he was there, but, and he said, well, see you in 2 weeks in LA. And because he was talking about that all by myself session, that was already booked. I think it was at Ocean, what's that famous studio there back then anyway? Ocean Sound, I think. Yeah.
Sunset.
Or exactly. So that's where the recording session was happening. So that's how it started. And then Rennie came to us and he said, well, we have this idea of a tour. It's going to be, it was 2.5 months long. Okay. So starting, starting mid-September, all over Europe, 12 different countries, I think, all the way to the beginning of December, something like that. So, and my wife of the time was pregnant with our first baby.
Wow.
So she was due on December 6th. And then for some reason, the tour got postponed a few days. So I only returned on the 8th. But my wife still hadn't, So, wow. So on December 8th, and that night I had a show in New York City, the very last show of that leg anyway, in New York City for some foundation, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. So, so my daughter, Rose, came at 3 p.m. And then at 3:20, I was rushing out the hospital to the airport, getting on a 4 o'clock flight to New York, got to New York around 6:30, then drove all the way to downtown New York, got backstage at 8 o'clock. The show was at 8:30. Wow. It was just an incredible day. And then at some point, Celine stopped the show. It's a full house, We're in this big building and then big audience. And then Celine stopped the show and she said, well, something very special happened today to one of my musicians. So Marc here just became a father today of a beautiful Rose. And the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, I didn't know, but the name of the foundation is 65 Roses. I think it's 65 Roses Foundation. They just called it that name. Wow. And my daughter's name was Rose. Amazing. My daughter's name is Rose.
So you made the birth of your child and did a Celine Dion gig in one day.
And I had bought some cigars from Holland prior to returning from Europe. They were called Bonheur, like happiness, the little cigars. I had them with me in New York. So, then after the show, we all had a little cigar. And it was just
amazing. It's just a beautiful story.
Yeah.
I'm curious, the Celine Dion gig, how much scope did you have as a bass player to put your stamp on it? Was she fairly specific with parts?
Oh, no.
Or was there freedom in that?
No.
What did it look like?
Well, bass playing is not about playing, necessarily playing exact notes. Bass playing is about driving the thing. It's about it's raw energy. It's what makes people, go like this. That's bass playing. That's effective bass playing should do that. And so with Celine, I used all of my jazz knowledge. Basically, what helped me was that I could improvise. So when I said this show where we had 2 hours long, blah, 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 I didn't learn all the notes specifically. I knew the chord progression, I knew the basic groove, okay? And then I just improvised in that. And that's what I did with Celine all those years. For 20 years, that's all I did with her. Same thing I did in studio. When you get into studio, some producers will want exactly what's on the chart. That's true. But most producers will just, okay, can you add a little bit of, that little extra that you can do that? A gliss here and there, a few extra notes, your feel. I want you feel on the track. So,
I love what you said
So that was that was my approach this whole time. And Dominic on drums was exactly doing the same.
So it's changing from kind of subtly from night to night how you play.
Exactly. We never performed the same show exactly, which was a real advantage for a bass player and a drummer, because for a guitar player, it's very tough to do that. Or for a pianist, it's almost impossible. These guys, because everybody can sing that guitar solo, they can sing the piano part. And even Celine, she can hardly change her own vocal track because people, that's what they want to hear. That's what they focus on. But bass, nobody will come to me and say, hey, you didn't play that F sharp there, or you skipped that G there. But it's a feel. It's what okay, wow, I was really grooving tonight, we were, we were having a good time,
Interesting.
So it's really,
So one thing from my career that I've learned is that I feel like one of our jobs as a bass player is to make the singer or the frontline player feel good.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've heard stories over the years of singers not liking rhythm sections because they don't feel good. Yeah. What's your take on that? How do you make a singer of the magnitude of Celine Dion feel great? What does that look like?
Well, I think, first of all, with someone like Celine Dion, you have to have absolute perfect time.
Right.
That's the number one issue, Like, I'm talking clock reference, digital clock reference time. The whole time I was learning playing the bass, I had a metronome next to me, and I was making sure that I was right on it, to a point where actually at some point you don't hear the metronome anymore.
Yeah.
Because you're so, you're so in clock with it, like along with it. That's number one issue, okay? That's comfort on stage, because if your time is perfect, then, obviously people will feel good. That's number one. And then obviously the whole attitude that you have to have with people like that. Celine, she's very humble. She's very, she's funny. She's, she's just, she has no pretension. So, or she's not pretentious. So, being part of a team with someone like that at the top, there's no room for any kind of attitude. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so that was one thing that I think I just had that, I've always been humble, and I think that really kind of worked with her in a way. And I remember, I'm sure that I've met so many artists, and most of them, I'd say, would be just the same.
Did Celine ever give you any input to the bass lines, or did she trust you? What did that look like?
I think, they just trusted us. René, at some point, we once we went to Los Angeles, and I think George Harrison had just died, and we were required to play something, the famous Beatles song, something that George Harrison wrote. But it was with, the guy was from the Eagle, the guitar player. Joe Walsh, exactly. He was a good buddy with George Harrison. And so in the room we had George Widow, and his son was there also. And then, And but I'm telling the story because after we performed the song, this song I grew up with the Beatles, so the bass track, the Paul McCartney's bass track on this is just absolutely sublime, right? Yeah. So I've learned this track, like, you know, and I knew it by heart. So this session came, we're live, and I played the bass the best I could, you know, but remembering all these little hooks and, okay, he waits there and he does this little thing there. And so after the performance, Renee came to me and he said, well, Marc, where did you learn this track? And I said, Renee, I grew up with that music. You know, I've played this music, you know, all my life. I've enjoyed this music. So it's all a matter of, you know, I think Renee's approach to, you know, was, okay, I'm going to try to get the best people I can behind Celine, and I'm going to leave them alone. I'm going to let them do their very best, you know.
Wow.
Confidence. We always felt like we had Renee's confidence and Celine's confidence, you know. So what it does is that, man, not only you give 100%, you're going to give 125%. Or even 150%, because you're so comfortable. You are yourself, and you know that you're appreciated for what you do. And there's no one that will come and say, maybe you should try this or that, you know. No, there's none of that. And also with, you know, the other thing that I had the chance to do with Celine was to sing along with her. Because there was this French duet. Yeah.
I think it's in our show.
J'irai où tu iras.
Yeah, we put it in to come out.
There you go. So
you sang the male part?
All around the world, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So Jean-Jacques Goldman, who's the French singer who actually composed the song, just came, you know, when he was available, and for the big cities, let's say, like he did the duet with her in Paris and, well, mostly Paris and maybe Montreal once. But otherwise, I was the guy that would cover the part. So I would come down stage with Celine, and we'd have for 5 minutes this super rocky thing, you know. And I was rocking the bass and the singing. You know, Paul McCartney was not far, you know, in terms of the Beatles were doing that, you know. Singing and playing along was, you know, my school. So I always, you know, did that. I fronted band, you know, as a teenager. Playing in clubs and stuff. So
I'm really just curious, slightly nerdy question. You don't get many of these from me, but how much of the Celine Dion show was on click track? How much of it was live? Were you freewheeling at points? How did that work?
No, everything. I'm telling you why. Everything was on click track for one reason, is that production at that level requires that, because the lights, the special effects, the moving stage, there's so much going on. Right. Everything that's been, you know, shown on screens, it's all programmed. And so, well, there's a stop and a start, right? So there's a start and then there's a stop at the end of the song. But there's always a click at the beginning. So we play with a click track. Now, do we need the click? I didn't need the click, really. You know, right. I could ask, okay, get rid of the click for me. I don't need that. I'm just going to follow the drums, and we're just going to be together and groove the thing.
So you didn't have the click in
Not at all times. Sometimes it was required because of different, you know, parts, and you really want to make sure you're...
Were there auxiliary string parts and percussion, other instruments on the click track too?
Sometimes what they'll do is they would double some, sometimes they would double some instruments, or the backing, the back choir, the choirs, you know, the vocal, just to add up some sound, just to add up some meat to the bone. But these girls and guys were still singing for real. It's just adding a little bit of, or some guitar parts sometimes, because you only have one guitarist on stage, but then, or two, we had two at that point, but sometimes there are 4, 5, 6 different guitar tracks. So you have but simple stuff, but just adding a little bit. But otherwise, I mean, we could have done the show without any tracks, basically, and we did actually. We did. Yeah. At some point, but you know, when you're in a big stadium or a big amphitheater, you need to fill up the room with the sound. So then the more, the merrier.
Brilliant. So I'm going to ask you another question from the Celine Dion Experience Band. This is from Andy, the MD, David Foster. Can you tell us about working with him?
Oh man, David Foster is such a unique talent. Yeah. You know, that session with All By Myself, that's the first time I saw him work, and I was completely blown away by one thing. You know, when we work in studio, the singers, they will call it comping, right? They comp the vocal parts. Yep. Because the singer will sing the same songs, maybe like Celine would go in 5 or 6 times in a row, you know. Yep. Let's say All By Myself, blah, 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 okay, bang, 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 bang. And then, but Foster has all these tracks on separate faders. But he remembers exactly what he enjoyed from track 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. And so at some point he says, okay, we're gonna comp this now. So, okay, open this track, and then he gets at the board and get the tape rolling. At the time it was tape rolling anyway. And then, okay, mute, unmute, unmute, 6, 6, 4, 2, 6, 5, 1. I'm telling you, it was amazing. I couldn't believe that he had all of that so fresh in his memory. You know, 6 tracks later, he could remember, I like this word from there. And he would comp it himself. Yeah, that's David Foster. That's quite unique in terms of, I've never seen anyone doing this at such a speed, actually, you know, to be able to do it right then.
What memories, recollections do you have? Let's talk specifically about All By Myself, that bass part, creating that bass part.
Oh, man.
What was that like?
Well, we spent the whole day in the studio, you know, because it takes forever, right, to get, like, let's say, to get the drum sound right, and then to get the guitar sound, because we wanted to perform all at once, and that's what we did. We played that song, you know, a few times, but we spent the whole day there for maybe an hour or 2 hours of recording at the end. So that's how we did it. But then there was this one lick that I did at some point, you know, at the turnaround before getting into the second chorus, or I don't exactly remember what this happened. And Foster he just picked up on that. He just, man, I like this. So he liked that. So yeah, and then you know, after that, obviously there's a mix of synth bass and electric bass in that mix. You know, that's another of David Foster's signature. Right. You know, he likes that really fat bass. And you know, this is 30 years ago, so sub bass was there, but it was nowhere near where it is now. You know, now we hear this super deep and very defined bass sound because the speakers can allow it, the processing can allow it, you know. Yeah. But it's still my track, and it's still, you know, and Foster just, you know, picked up on what I had played and just doubled it here and there to add up, you know, some color and...
Did he, I have to ask, did he, the comping thing that you talked about, the vocal, would he have done the same thing with the bass part?
Oh, he probably went over everything.
Yeah. Did you have 5 or 6 bass parts down, or?
Nope.
Just one?
Just one, yeah. Interesting. Because, yeah, you know, as a studio musician, I learned at some point that the best track would come just in one piece, you know, top to bottom, very few edit, and even, you know, no edit at all, you know. So, of course, you have to work on the track. You have to listen to what you just did. And, okay, I'm going to go from there and take it one step further and one step further. But eventually, you know, you get there. But what it does, you're in one moment. And that's what's on the, you know, that's what is there. And it's just...
Who were the studio musicians
that
influenced you?
Oh, man, Marcus Miller.
Yep.
For sure, Marcus Miller was a big, big influence. Darryl Jones.
Yeah.
Another, you know, black guys, man. So many great black players. Jamie Jamerson, of course, after, you know, that's cool. But also, Of course, Paul McCartney, Sting. I always thought that Sting was such an amazing bassist, you know, because he writes like compositional bass lines, like Paul McCartney did. You know, you can take that one bass line and it stand on its own. You know, you add one melody to that and you have a song right there. Sting is, you know, is a master of that. So these were basically the guys that I've listened to. Pino Palladino was another one. Yeah. Great componist. You know, Tony Levin, obviously. Tony Levin was such an influence on me. You know, such an influence.
What about the other guys? Bob Babbitt.
Of course, yes.
Duck Dunn of those periods.
Yeah. But these guys, I discovered them later. I think I just found out about them later as I was learning more about, oh wow, Motown, and oh wow, oh this, and then wow, okay. Carol Kay, I knew of her growing up because I used to learn from her methods. You know, she had put some methods out, and you know, these were my first, you know, learning how to groove kind of thing out of these books, you know.
So let's go back to the Celine gig. You scored the gig. It turned into an unexpected
20 years. So 2.5 months turned out to be 20 years. And basically it's when René fell sick again, you know, because he had cancer around the year 2000, you know. It was only 5 years into this thing when René fell sick the first time. He had cancer, throat cancer, I think. But this came back in 2014. And so we stopped everything by then. And that's when, you know, I realized, okay, I've been doing this for 20 years. And one thing I really felt strongly about was, besides, you know, feeling like so fill up with gratitude, and I wanted to share with the kids. You know, I always loved, you know, teaching. I always did teach, and so to be able to, you know, be surrounded with, you know, young people, and I think it's very good for, you know, for everything. But the other thing was, I felt strongly about sleeping in my own bed every night.
Right. I can understand.
Because I had been touring since the age of 15, and turning 55 kind of hit that number. You know, it was like, okay, I've been doing this for 40 years, man. Touring clubs or whatever, not being at home every night. And I know some people just envy it. They're like, "This man, you've been traveling the world. It's amazing." Well, yes, it is amazing, but at some point, you know, what's even more amazing is to be at home with someone you love, surrounded by the one that you love and loves you, the dog that you walk every morning. I mean, that's my reality right now, and I so enjoy it, you know.
I'm really curious, you made me piqued my curiosity of something. When you were with Celine Dion, did you work for a period of months and then maybe have a couple of months off? How did that? Yeah, what was there a rhythm to it?
First 5 years, basically, we were on tour 9 months out of 12.
Wow.
That went on for 5 years. So we'd be out for, let's say, 3 months, we'd return for a month. Then we'd be out for another 2 months, and then we'd be home for maybe 6 weeks, and then we'd be back on the road for another, 3 months, and it just went on. We did 2 world tours between 1995 and the year 2000. We did Let's Talk About Love. Yep. First, we did the previous tour, because Let's Talk About Love was the second world tour. The first one was called, oh my God, Falling Into You, Falling Into You. Right. This one song. That was her first Grammy, yeah? She got her first Grammy for that single, and the record, I think, won the best pop album of the year in 1995 or whatever, or 90, whatever. We were at the Grammys night in New York City when this happened, so we rushed to the room there and met all these amazing, people like Stevie Wonder, and anyway, it was incredible. Yeah.
Wow. So I'm really curious, because I love to understand the person behind the music. you'd have 3 months' work, and then you come home for a month. What was that month like? What did you do? What happened?
I owned an old home at the time, a century-old home, downtown Montreal.
Yep.
Or just west of downtown, but in a neighborhood called Snowden.
Yep.
So very, English or Wales or. What I do is just work on the house.
Really?
Use my hands and I needed this thing where, well, besides, taking care of the kids and riding my bike and putting my daughter on the bike and climbing the hill and the mountain, the Mont Royal and all. But yeah, working on the house, like painting or scraping or whatever, or building something new and something really, real. Because music, it's all up in the air. It's great, but once the show's done, it's all gone. It's the moment, right? You're in the moment. Yeah. But I needed something that, okay, once I'm done, it's still there. I can look at it, I can touch it, I can be proud of myself. I have a proof of, yeah.
Then makes me think next, what was the cost? What price did you pay for?
Oh my God, yeah. The cost is, being away at some point really, really affects the relationship.
Yeah.
I
understand.
Especially when you tour with this kind of intensity. You're traveling the world. You spend more time in airports than at home, and you're all over the place. Sometimes you're 20 hours away, or all of that. You live on the same planet, but you're in different time zones, you're in different countries, and even though you try really hard to make things work and to keep the thing alive, that's the price I had to pay for this. And I think many artists, many musicians will understand that. Many artists, will understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I remember one Easter, because we're turning Easter now. I was in Australia. I don't remember the city. But on Easter morning, and my kids were, they were babies still. They were like 3 years old, 4 years old. And I remember crying, because I felt like, I can't, I don't know what I would give to be at home at this very moment with my wife and kids and, enjoying Easter,
Thank you for sharing that. That's very profound.
Yeah.
So let's move into this current phase. Well, it's been 10 years, hasn't it? We're currently filming at the Gâteau School of Music here.
Yeah, it's called the Conservatoire de Musique du Québec à Gatineau. Yeah, it's a state school. I've been, 10 years ago. So when I decided, okay, I want to change pace, and I want to be I want to live something different after 20 years with Celine. Well, this came along. Someone just met me and said, well, there's this job opening. Maybe you'd be good at it. And at first I was like, nah, that's not for me. But after a few days, I started to put things together and said, well, maybe I have something that I could bring to this school, basically. I could probably, make a difference. And so I just decided at the very last minute to get involved in the process. And I wasn't alone. Huh? There was people from as far as Australia that were actually applying to the job.
Yeah.
To be the director,
Was the school just in its infancy at that point?
No. This school's been open for almost 60 years.
Right.
It was founded in 1967 here. But the whole network was founded in 1942. So it's an old, it's an old organization. And so anyway, I just, applied for the process, and then it took months and months. And then all of a sudden there were only 2 left, and I was one of them. And so, but you have the, psychometric test and all. You know what that is, huh?
Yeah.
They will study you from very different point of view and they don't take it lightly. It's a very serious process. And but I so enjoy, and all the things that I've talked about before, like, you know, playing by memory, learning the craft of music through singing, you know, so you learn to speak the language before you actually learn it on the instrument. All these things, I brought it with me here in the school. And now the students that we actually, you know, we see, you know, become professionals, because the mandate of the school is to produce, you know, to take young musicians and turn them into professional musicians.
Right. Wow.
Classical first, of course, because we're teaching the classical curriculum. You know.
Yep.
We're a classical school. But many of our kids, they do, you know, like I was talking to you about this kid who was a phenomenal cellist, and he bought one of my bass, the fretless bass, because I, you know, and I said, yeah, you're good for it, because you're used to listen to your intonation, so you're gonna have a great time on the fretless, and you're gonna be a great fretless bass player.
I'm really curious then, for someone who's had a 20-year career, pop career, with the foundation of jazz below it, you're director of music at a classical institution. Mm-hmm. That seems quite unusual. How did that come about?
Well, like I said, I grew up with classical music at first. Baroque music was my first love. You know, Baroque music came back in the 60s. That's when Baroque music was rediscovered. You know, there was always music, Baroque music, but in the 1960s, there was a big interest, starting in the 50s, but in the 60s, it just came out. And then it kept going in the 70s, the 80s, especially in England, you know. My favorite conductor is Christopher Ogwood, he conducted the Academy of Ancient Music for many, many years, clavecinist, right? Yep. But also, he's also a musicologist. And if you enjoy listening, let's say, to Handel's Messiah, his version of the Messiah is the very first version performed on historical instruments back in the early 80s. So historical instruments means Baroque oboes, Baroque flutes, Baroque everything.
You just stimulated a memory of
Christopher Ogwood. He's dead now, but...
Yeah, but just when I was at music college, they had an early music department.
Yeah.
Of all of this stuff. I haven't thought about it in 20 years.
And that movement was quite strong. And you know, one thing that I met George Martin, I met him twice. And I have something in my office, I'll show you his autograph to Marc. All the best.
We'll capture that.
Yeah, but George Martin was actually, he played oboe. He was an oboist. I didn't know. I found out later. He was an oboist, and he hung out with all these Baroque guys. He was very fond of Baroque music. So once you know this, and he was an arranger, and he was he knew all these things. So the Beatles comes along, and George Martin is like, wow, okay, now I have all this amazing melodic material and this creativity, but he had the musical knowledge to really bring it and make it it became classical music. You know, that's the Beatles music is classical music. I mean, basically, that's what it is. And that's because of George Martin's knowledge and expertise in music, you know. Fascinating, huh?
So what was it a big shift to go from being a touring pop musician to running a school like this?
Of course. But I had a vision. You know, when I came to, it wasn't, okay, I'm not going to sit behind a desk and just sign paper. What I want to do with this school, I want to transform it. I want to transform this school. I want to make sure, you know, one thing that always bugged me, because the conservatoire, it was already present when I was a kid, right? Yeah. My dad took me to the conservatoire when I was 5 years old. And so I was there for a few years, and I learned a lot about ears, but it's not where I learned music. But the thing is, it always bugged me that some people have 10 years of conservatoire and they can't even play like Happy Birthday without a chart. You know, I was like, okay, something's wrong. There's something that is missing in that training, formal training. And it's all about getting the ears involved, the earlier the better. And that's why now all our students here, when we get them, they're 8 years old, they all go through children choirs. We have 2 different choirs. Everybody gets to sing first. You play your piano and you're gonna sing in our choir and you're gonna open your ears. And then once that is done, the next step is when you perform, you get rid of the charts. And now a lot more kids do that. They will take the time to memorize the music and they will perform without the chart. And then the music comes from your heart. It doesn't come from, you know, from your head. It just...
If you can put it concisely, what is your vision for this place?
Well, I think that it's hard to say, you know, it's the one thing, I think that what I did so far, the teachers have gained confidence in their own craft. Because 10 years is a long time, you know. First 5 years, basically, for me, was just like to kind of seize the place. You know, like, okay, so these are the issues that we need to confront. The second 5 years that I'm completing now was the time to put, you know, all these things at work and try things and, okay, let's try this and that. And I think I've transformed not only this school, but also, you know, the whole system within our institution within Quebec. You know, so if I retire, you know, next year, well, I think I can be, you know, happy with what, you know, my contribution in a way.
Okay, well, let's bring it to our last question then. So I think this is a really apt place to finish. If this is a conversation was the last thing that people heard from you, what would you want them to know, remember, or carry with them about you?
Oh, wow. Just dream big. Because all of this was a dream at first. I just dreamed of touring the world and becoming this, you know, a professional musician that would just be able to walk on the streets of London and Vienna and South Africa and, you know, and meet the people there and get all this input, because that's what it does to you. It changes you because and then you realize that we're all the same. All human beings are the same. We all need the same thing to be happy. We need love and we need understanding and we need to share this message. And we're so privileged as musicians because we have this amazing chance to get on stage and generate this transformation. So I think that's, yeah, these would be my words. Dream big and then get to work. Because the dream won't happen if you don't get to work. Get involved, learn your craft. Be very, very detailed and go all the way. Don't cut corners. And life will take care. Life will take care. Be confident in life. Have trust in life, you know.
Dream big. Marc Langis, thank you very much.
James, it was a real pleasure. Thank you for showing up. And anyway, all the best to you.
That really was truly special. Marc Langis is one of those rare musicians whose story really does deserve to be heard more widely. He's toured the world, played with legends, and shaped countless young players for the future, all with a huge amount of humility, depth, and unwavering love for the craft of being a musician and a bass guitarist. What I'll remember most is how open and generous he was, not just sharing the highlights, but also the deeper reflections, the real life of being a working musician. Marc, thank you for your honesty, your warmth, and taking the time to sit down with me. And to all of you guys for watching this interview. Thank you for being part of the eBass Guitar 60K journey. I've got some incredible conversations still to come, so please make sure you subscribe to the eBass Guitar YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next interview.